My name is Yossi Shavit, and that's the fourth session that will deal with private, governmental, and local investment in education. We are going to open with a lecture by one of the people who formed the public discourse about education, Nachum Blass, my friend from the TAR Center. First of all, I would like to thank the people from Yozma for Applied Research in Education who have given me the possibility and this opportunity to rethink and concentrate all the insights that I have acquired in many years of work in this domain. So thank you very much, all of you. My second point is that I would like to apologize because I am going to read it from the page, and I'm afraid of the chairperson and Oded who waves the pages, and I'll try to concentrate, and I hope to be able to do the job. I First of all, I would like to say a few words in memory of Professor Ruth Klinov that passed away a few days ago. Ruth was my teacher in economics in the 1960s, and for many years she has accompanied my professional career in her guidance. She was one of the few senior economists that were totally involved in the everyday experience of education in Israel. Her research studies are a cornerstone, or milestones rather, milestones on this path. One of her biggest contribution is what she wrote about, the book she wrote about the economics of education. And there is no way to speak about this study without mentioning her unique contribution. She wrote about the distribution of resources, the achievements of Israel as compared with the achievements of other countries, the private expenditure for education, etc., etc. I wanted her to be the respondent today, but she couldn't do it because of her health issues. I'm going to miss her guiding hand for ages, and I'm delighted to have as a respondent a representative of the younger generation of the economists, Ms. Noah Hyman. I'm sure that we are going to have some differences of opinion, but this is the way to discuss such important issues. This study day is dedicated to the studies of the literature reviews in the project Initiative in Education. I was given the duty to do some of this work. I collected whatever I could find. So of course, not everything. So if anybody wants to add to it, I'll be more than delighted. And this is the distribution of resources according to social status and decentralization whenever it was needed, that the Ministry of Education, the households, and the sector have given to the different groups of the population. I did my best when I didn't find, where I didn't find academic studies, to fill the gap on the basis of other data that had been published by the Center of Research and Information of the Knesset, the Central Bureau of Statistics, and the Ministry of Education. The resources can be pooled under the title budget, but I have made a distinction between the different budgets for for teachers, for facilities, etc. You have the abstract of this site, and because of the shortage of time, I won't be able to touch upon all the subjects. That is why I'm going to speak about a few important issues, and I'll end with some recommendations for the policymakers. The main point that we can find in the review is that despite all the efforts and the rhetoric of all the people who are responsible for allocating funds to the education studies, inequality keeps on being present. Sometimes it is reduced, but in other cases, it becomes bigger. Inequality is a situation in which any part of the population, however it is defined, gets an equal part of the resources equal to its part share in the population. I call it formal equality. An affluent sector of the population gets more, there is a situation of inequality, even according to the formal equality definition. But I would define equality in another way. And we've written about it in a study with Professor Chaim Adler, who's here with us. According to my definition, equality is present only when any part of the population receives the same quantity of resources that enables it to get to the same achievements that are being acquired by other parts. Ruth Klinov would say that a situation of a real equality exists when the marginal output addition for each shekel would be equivalent in each part of the population. According to this definition, inequality keeps on being maintained even within a situation of formal equality, or if there is not sufficient affirmative action. This is a very important discussion if we want to analyze the policy of the Ministry of Education and the Israeli society, and has to do with a disagreement between the approach that prefers the same allocation and the other one that wants it to be differential. The second main point is that the affluent groups of the population have actually put the biggest barriers on the path of gap reducing, and only when they were satisfied in their claims, the Ministry of Education could advance an egalitarian a policy or a semi-egalitarian policy. I'm going to illustrate these 2 points, and that's why I called my lecture, Who Wants Equality in Education? And the conclusion of the lecture is going to be nobody. In the fascinating book by Shai Piron, Everything Revolves Around Education, he wrote the following. For the first time after many years, we have started a process for a significant differential budget of 30%. The pressures exerted were terrible. Yair Lapid didn't let him do it because it would affect his constituency. These are the moments in which you discover that for some of the people, talking about the people of Israel, love for Israel are only slogans, lip service. Let's see who are the elements that are at play here in this domain of budget allocation. We will be helped by the data from the Central Bureau of Statistics in a press release in October 2015. It seems that in the age range of the formal education, the public budgeting is the main element, and the relative weight of the local municipalities is not big, despite the fact that some of the researchers, the distinguished researchers, think differently. In this press release by the Central Bureau of Statistics, it was said that the share of the local municipalities is 6% in elementary education and only 2% in high schools. But when we relate to higher education and to the ages 0 to 2, the households have quite a bigger weight. And now I am going to briefly describe the budgeting policy of the Ministry of Education. In a sweeping way, we can make two statements. First of all, the ministry does not exercise affirmative action affirmative action in the preschool area and preschool education, and in the high and the higher high school, but it does so in the elementary school and in the junior high schools. The findings of the literature point at the fact that if you want to bring students from a weakened socioeconomic background to the achievements of the affluent students, you have to give them at least 50% more in budget terms. If this is true, and specifically so for Israel, then the affirmative action of the Ministry of Education in the elementary school and in the middle high junior high schools cannot reduce the gaps in a significant way. This is a graph. Well, the Ministry of Education in the past year has started something very important, and this is the publication of the distribution of budgets between the different groups of the population. This graph shows the budget per class according to groups of schools and according to the deprivation index. I'll explain. You can do it according to a budget per child, then the gaps are bigger, and by the way they appear in the publications. Nachum, don't get into questions and answers right now, please. If we look at this transparency that speaks about budget per student, I think that the budget per class would be better. We can see that the gap between the strongest quintile and the weakest quintile was 4%, 14% only. In junior high school, the situation is even more serious. A classroom in the weakest quintile gets 5% less than a class. The situation in 2014 is worse than it was in 2012. And finally, in high school, where the data are only are only per student, in 2014 there is almost no difference between the expense per student in the two quintiles, the strongest one and the weakest one. As you can see, the situation in terms of the distribution of resources for students from different backgrounds is not very good. When you talk about the state secular education, it seems, and religious state education, the data seem better. As for the ultra-Orthodox education, the gaps between them and the formal education are very big. It's surprising that the Ministry of Education does not see fit to publish the budgeting data of the Haredi ultra-Orthodox students, because we are talking here about 80,000 pupils. What did the ministry do in order to change things? If I go to the extreme, I'll say in an understatement that they have not done much. In the preschool domain, there has almost been no policy of affirmative action, and if there was any preference of for children from weak sectors, the tuition fee was graduated, but graduated tuition fee makes education more accessible, but does not create any setting in the education system itself. That is why the application of mandatory free education is regressive, because students from affluent backgrounds were exempt from this move. And also the last process of adding an assistant in the kindergartens does not give any advantage to kindergartens which cater for children from weaker sectors of the population. The universality of the services is also being accentuated. This is a central issue whenever people discuss equality in social systems. I'll only say that if the universal financing of services brings about a benefit to the weakened sectors that should be taken in consideration in a positive way, but any other move should be prevented. Let's speak now about the budgeting policy of the Ministry of Education in the elementary education. In the review that you can read on the internet, there is a detailing of the different budgeting systems, and there is a distinction between the deprivation index and the method of budgeting. Just in order to explain to those who have not understood it yet, when we are talking about the deprivation index, this is a tool to measure the relative difficulty that emanates from other that prevents people from another background to get to academic achievement. But when we speak about a method of budgeting, we are talking about a formula or formulae that are used when the budget is being distributed. This formula can either use or not use the deprivation index. It can be progressive when the other one is regressive, and the other way around. As I've said a year ago, Shai Piron, the then Minister of Education, said that they would go back to the differential standard per student. He said that this would give a preference of 30% to students from a weak socioeconomic background. I have made my reservation at this process, and I'm not going to repeat it now. Let me just show you two transparencies which describe the substantive differences between the results of the budgeting. According to the differential standard method, and according to the Shoshani formula, we can see that between 2003, even before the introduction of this method, to 2008, when it was stopped, the preference for the weaker deciles increased in a significant way. On the other hand, this is what is supposed to happen at the end of the affirmative action process, according to the method, which is the new budgeting method. In other words, even at the end of the period, when we are in 4 or 5 years from now, with God's help, we will the benefit of the week of a week class is going to be 7 hours only, about 15% over the other type. But the strong classes are not going to be affected at all.
Now, more than that, according to this statement, the number of hours that will be allocated to affirmative action in the elementary and junior high school periods at the end, no, it's going to be okay. At the end of this period, will be 250,000 hours, whereas now it's 100,000. This addition is 150,000 hours, half of which only are added by the Ministry of Finance. The rest is at the expense of other Ministry of Education projects. And here you need to know that back in the year 2000, the scope of hours in the deprivation basket was 19,000 hours in other baskets, which means the number of students then was 30% lower than the expected number in 2019. Only in order to keep the same level of affirmative action in 2000, we should have added 40,000 hours. So just 30,000 hours more really won't make a difference. Okay, because of what you just showed me, I will move on. You see, I am very obedient. As for the size of the classroom, the Ministry of Education did in recent years adopt an affirmative action policy and they determined a different size of classroom according to the policy of the school. This policy even bore good fruit, particularly in the junior high schools in the Arab sector, and less remarkable fruit in the Jewish elementary school system. And yet, this affirmative action preference only has to do with the transition stage. Once the decision to make the number of children in each classroom smaller is implemented, the entire education system is supposed to follow the same rules, and the affirmative action will actually be annulled. A hint of what is expected can be seen in the decision that all first graders in Israel will have no more than 32 children in each classroom. I have to move on, so I'm only talking briefly. Now, as for the local government, as for the contribution of local government to inequality, opinions are not in agreement. Most of the scholars who engaged in this, and many of the people who spoke here this morning, maintain that its impact is great and creates inequality. I think differently. I think that the local government's contribution is not great because its share in the budget is not so big. And we also must not ignore the fact that in most local authorities there is an internal policy at play of affirmative action. I think support for this can be found in a research I have conducted together with Noam Zussman and Mr. Tsur that was based on 2001-2008 data and will be published soon by the Taub Center. And we have reached the conclusion that although the local authority budget do have a regressive impact, it is quite small. Also, the analysis of the data on education spending in local authorities, once you deduct the Ministry of Education budgets, you reach the same conclusion. Households. Parents contribute in three channels. The first, payments directly to the school. The second, payments made outside the school, such as extracurricular activities and private tuition. And the third is the resources used at home. As for the first, these fees are usually quite small in the preschool, elementary, and junior high systems. In the past, they tried to accumulate data from schools by the Central Bureau of Statistics, but these have ceased. Other initiatives that came out of the Knesset were very limited in scope, and their reliability is questionable. So, in the absence of data from schools, the best information comes from household surveys. In this slide, we can see that the total spending per student, this is from a statement to the press that was recently published by the Central Bureau of Statistics. So the total spending is 326 shekels per student, of which about a third goes directly to the school, about a third goes to extracurricular activities after school, and the rest is things at home. But what is more interesting are the differences between the top quintile and the bottom quintile, because there you see that while at school the difference is about double between the top quintile and the bottom quintile, in payments for extracurricular activities after school hours, the difference is 13 times as high. That is the contribution of households to gaps in education. Since 4 minutes ago I was told I had 3 minutes, I will only tell you the recommendations now. Okay, the time is up. Okay, so just the recommendations now. And before the recommendations, I just want to quote Yuli Tamir in her wonderful book that sums up what she has learned. It seems that in Israeli society, equality is somewhere at the bottom of the value scale, which means that in Israeli society, everyone is personally willing to get on board national targets, security targets, but there seems to be an implicit, effective rebellion against any process that promotes social mobility and equality. The huge gap between the egalitarian discourse that used the Israeli elite and the mechanisms that preserved the gaps have created the first seeds of social frustration. And if anyone wants to know what my recommendations are as for what to do, then these are it. That's them up on the slide.